Okay, let's do a quick thought experiment. I want you to imagine for just a second that you're this incredibly powerful ruler of a vast empire, right? Your walls are sky high, your guards are armed to the teeth, and you command this massive, sprawling army. Now, when an enemy army approaches from the battlefield, you can see them humming. You can literally measure their strength. But what happens when the threat is just one single person, hiding right there in plain sight? It's a crazy contrast when you really think about it. An army relies on sheer physical strength, right? On numbers. But an assassin relies on fear. And that fear, that pure psychological terror, actually has the power to shake entire nations, collapse governments, and completely flip the direction of wars.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into the absolute darkest corners of power. We're going to trace exactly how single, shadowy figures have weaponized fear to alter the entire course of human history. From ancient kingdoms all the way to modern-day intelligence agencies, we'll see how the most feared individuals in history, well, they weren't always the strongest fighters. Instead, they were the ones who understood human weakness and knew exactly how to exploit our deepest trust.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by digging into the literal origins of assassination, then move into the shadowy realms of poison and espionage. After that, we'll look at the bullets that literally reshaped our modern world, examine the so-called ghosts of the Cold War era, and finally, we'll take a look at the terrifying future of targeted fear. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1. The Origins of Assassination. Now, what's really interesting here is that the word assassin itself actually comes from a medieval secret order known as the Hashashin. These guys operated way up in the mountains of Persia and Syria during the 11th and 12th centuries, and they were led by a mysterious figure named Hassani Sabah. They basically became infamous for targeting these really powerful political and military leaders. But here's the thing, unlike those massive armies that would just overwhelm their opponents with brute force, the Hashashin, they relied entirely on surgical precision. And this is where the true terror really kicks in. You see, their operatives wouldn't just kick down the front door. Nope. They used incredibly clever disguises, posing as humble servants, wandering monks, or maybe just everyday travelers. But what made them so deeply feared was their terrifying, almost unbelievable patience. Historical records actually show these operatives spending months, literally months, pretending to be loyal servants just to get close to a ruler. And when they finally struck, they'd often do it in very public places. I mean, just imagine the psychological terror that created. Nobody knew who they could trust. Kings, generals, they lived in constant fear, knowing that death could literally be standing right next to them, pouring their wine or carrying their luggage. And, that total weaponization of trust perfectly brings us to 44 BCE over in ancient Rome. This is where political assassination became a truly deadly, world-altering tool. The death of Julius Caesar is, without a doubt, one of history's most famous killings. Now sure, this was carried out by senators rather than professional, trained assassins, but the core principle? Exactly the same: fear and betrayal. Caesar was stabbed multiple times by men he deeply, deeply trusted, including Brutus, whose betrayal, as we all know, became absolute legend. This single event proved to the world that political murder could completely reshape entire civilizations. Moving on to Section 2, Shadows, Poison, and Espionage. So fast forward to the Renaissance, European courts basically became absolute epicenters of secret plots and silent murders. Powerful families, like the infamous Borgias, for example, were widely rumored to use poison as their go-to weapon against rivals. And the brilliant, or maybe terrifying part, they used food, wine, even perfume. They literally took the most mundane, everyday items and turned them into sources of mortal fear. Inside these royal courts, nobody truly felt safe. I mean, you didn't need to draw a sword to kill your enemy anymore. You just had to invite them over for dinner. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in feudal Japan, a completely different type of feared operative emerged: the ninja. Now, I know modern movies love to exaggerate what they could do, but honestly, the real history is just as fascinating. Real ninjas were highly trained spies and covert operatives. If you contrast them with the honorable samurai warriors who, fought openly on the battlefield, ninjas operated purely in the shadows. Their incredibly unique skill set was entirely focused on infiltration, espionage, sabotage, and targeted killings. They would move silently through the dark, scale castle walls, gather crucial intelligence. This totally mysterious, unseen image made them the ultimate symbols of fear all across Japan. All right, Section 3, Bullets that Reshaped History. Let's take a step back and see how this all builds over time. We go from Caesar way back in 44 BCE to the Hashashin in the 11th century, and then we take this massive leap in geopolitical consequences in 1914, which leads right up to the Cold War. As time went on, world leaders began to realize a genuinely terrifying truth. Eliminating just one specific person could change the fate of entire nations, and do it much, much faster than deploying an entire army. And the absolute starkest example of this chain reaction? That happened in 1914. A single bullet fired by Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo acted as the spark that literally triggered World War I. The ultimate toll of that one action: millions of deaths across the globe. It's a horrifying chain reaction when you really map it out. But it proved once and for all how one assassin, just one guy hiding in a crowd, could unintentionally yet completely reshape the entire modern world. Which brings us to Section 4, Cold War and Modern Ghosts. So the crucial point here is that during the Cold War, nations started secretly training operatives specifically for espionage and covert killings. Agencies like the KGB and the CIA became practically synonymous with secret operations all over the globe. They were using guns, poison, explosives, staged accidents, you name it. The world had effectively entered this new era where enemies could just be eliminated quietly without ever declaring a public war. And again, it all comes back to that psychological fear, right? You can see a battlefield enemy approaching from a distance, but a Cold War assassin, they hide right behind friendship, loyalty, or sometimes even love. But outside of state-sponsored intelligence, this era also gave rise to the legendary contract killer. Take Richard Kuklinski, for example, better known as the Iceman. Now, while he was a contract killer for organized crime rather than a political assassin, his reputation was absolutely terrifying, mostly because of his complete and total lack of emotion. He claimed to have murdered dozens of people using poison, guns, strangulation, but the true psychological horror here, his double life. It completely shocked investigators because on the surface, he appeared to be just an ordinary suburban family man. He used multiple methods, constantly switching things up, which made him entirely unpredictable to the authorities. We also saw the rise of infamous figures like Carlos the Jackal throughout the 1970s and 80s. This guy was an international terrorist who carried out attacks and murders across several different countries. And what made him a sort of modern ghost was his incredible ability to just slip right through the fingers of international intelligence for years. He operated entirely beyond borders. Assassins had basically evolved into these international specters, increasing their mythical, terrifying reputations on a global scale. And finally, Section 5. The future of targeted fear. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, with all our modern surveillance cameras, biometric systems, and digital tracking, covert operations must be a thing of the past, right? Well, not exactly. Technology hasn't eliminated the threat. It's just created entirely new, advanced dangers. We're talking cyber warfare, drones, remote-controlled weapons. Today, an assassination might involve hacking into critical infrastructure, completely disabling security networks remotely, or using advanced weaponry that can strike a target from literally miles away. You don't need to be standing in the room holding a vial of poison anymore. The striking comes straight from the sky without the attacker ever being seen. So despite centuries of technological evolution, one thing remains constantly, undeniably true. Assassins influence history far, far beyond the exact moment of the attack. They leave behind a massive wake of destruction, instability, and paranoia. Behind every famous assassination is a deep story of human ambition and betrayal. They exploit our baseline human weaknesses, and they strike exactly when nobody expects it. Which leaves us with a pretty chilling question to ponder. When the most powerful weapon in the world isn't a massive army, but an invisible person waiting in the shadows, or maybe operating a drone from 1,000 miles away, is anyone ever truly safe? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a fascinating new perspective on the hidden forces that have shaped our world.